Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Leading in a Crisis podcast. On our episode today, we're continuing our conversation with James Hartsfield, who recently retired as Director of Communications for NASA's Johnson Space Center here in Houston, Texas. On our episode today, we talked to James about the most difficult minutes and hours following the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia. In addition, James does a comparison for us between the incident responses to the loss of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1989 and then the Space Shuttle Columbia in 2003. And spoiler, it comes down a lot to following the crisis plan. But we have good conversation with James. Let's rejoin that conversation now.
I'm going to go back to one thing on contingency too, is I said where we last had communications with Columbia. We knew Columbia did not land in Florida. There was a big crowd there and everybody knew it didn't show up when it's supposed to. So, it's gone. But I couldn't really, I could not acknowledge, and I would not acknowledge that we had lost the crew per se in direct communications, because NASA knew and we knew right along that would be something that the loss of a crew would be announced by the White House, not by NASA. So we would not do that. And certainly when I went into that first team meeting, which was right down the hall from the control room, and was listening and working in there and listening to all the planning as they were pulling together the efforts to go handle the debris situation and everything that was going to go on, and starting all that they needed to do then. They paused that meeting because there's televisions up in the corners of the room, and you never did this in a meeting, but they paused the meeting and they turned up the sound of the television because it was the president coming on to acknowledge the loss of the crew. Very, really difficult.
Wow, that happened really quickly then, didn't it?
It did. It had to, right? Yeah. It seems to me like it happened in about a matter of seconds. It wasn't that. It was a couple hours, really.
Yeah.
But it stayed focused on the job, right? That was the one thing we were definitely always been trained to stay focused on the job. We had a job to do. Our job was to be calm, to get information out because the public safety depended on it, because NASA's transparency depended on it. And I will say this too about crisis communications is the most precious thing you have in a crisis situation is your integrity and your credibility. And if you compromise those, you're going to be helpless. You're going to be helpless going forward, So the way you do that, at least at NASA, is transparency and some immediacy about being transparent. You can, a first impression is everything. You can lose your integrity and your credibility in your first impression, and you can never get it back for years, has been my experience. So,
and James, was it pretty easy to turn statements around quickly, get things approved, get them going, or were you really focused on press conference prep then?
The initial one's easy because they were really if you look at them back there, you'll see that they're just restating what I said on console of that where Columbia was at the time, and then it's talking about debris and the hazards of debris and what to do. It took a little bit to get together a phone number and a place that if you see debris, where to report it, because we wanted people to do that. So the initial statement's pretty easy. We didn't really put out anything else in that until we got to the press conference. So, and there were other people on the team that were working those statements. I'd already done my part by being in the control room with that, right? So I was then at that point focused on helping prepare for the press conference, which was going to happen. That press conference, right? Those points, it was really to the first and foremost, what I did say, I will say this one thing, and this is not to knock. One of the things that happened with NASA that made Challenger and Columbia very different, from my understanding. I wasn't there for Challenger, but I worked with a lot of people that went through it, and I heard so much about how it went. And then I was there, of course, with Columbia, integral to it. is that if you looked at the communications plans, the crisis communications plans for both of those,
Yeah.
very, very similar, very similar. They really followed the same lines of immediacy, openness, transparency, delegation of authority to lower levels, this kind of thing. But what happened in Challenger is the leadership in place immediately threw that out the window, and they clammed up. And why they did that, I'm not going to second guess on it, right? But of course, it was a totally stunning thing. But it was stunning at Columbia too. But it was a stunning thing there because NASA had never had anything like that occur. They'd lost Apollo 1 fire, but that was a different situation. But stunning. Of course, anytime at NASA, anything that happens, we're all coworkers and friends, and you're close to the people that are affected, that you lose. There's grief that you're feeling at the same time that you're working through things, which probably is true of many crisis situations. So, for whatever reasons, they threw it out the window, and it immediately, what I'll say is like first impression, and within I think a matter of a day, it was in shatters NASA's credibility. The press didn't think they would get anything genuine out of NASA for Challenger. There was a adversarial relationship set up right away, which is a horrible thing. Yeah. Columbia, absolutely different, right? The leadership of the agency entrusted the plan. They went forward with it. They entrusted people who were at areas of responsibility to execute it. I was there working on those points for that first press conference right away. And I did get a note in that came from Washington saying they wanted to see every single thing I gave them for talking, gave to Ron for talking points. They wanted to see them before I gave them to Ron. There wasn't going to be time to do that. I mean, I was familiar with when you send things there, you don't get it back for hours. And so I passed back to them. I said, I can't do it. I just know that I'm going to tell him to say everything he knows, because that's what I was going to do. Right. And that's what I did. I said, say everything you know. We talked about the phone. We talked about, but they didn't know for sure that was what had caused it was going to take some time to figure that out as a possibility. Right. But it was counterintuitive what they had analyzed. James, and I told him.
Was that kind of a tense moment where you pushed back on headquarters about sending materials?
Well, they couldn't really reach me to gripe about it. I was in the secure area in the room, so I didn't feel any tension at that point, Tom, because my day had already been tense enough that there was nothing going to make me more tense, Might have been tense for somebody else,
But following the plan is just a huge issue and concern for NASA, obviously, but for any company that has a crisis plan. It's there for a reason. You need to be familiar with it. You need to practice it. And then
absolutely.
use it.
You need to trust it. I mean, that's the bottom line. Now, what does it take to build up trust? It actually takes developing it, not alone. When you develop as a group that includes leadership to the top of the company, because nobody trusts anything that they don't have a part in creating. I mean, I guess they do, but they're going to trust it better if they have a part in creating it. Right. And so it starts there. It goes on with certainly practicing it. And when you practice it, and this was key with Columbia, is that NASA had not always done this, but for whatever reason, we had started a while before the Columbia accident took place. We had started doing practice sessions that actually included leadership of the agency and leadership of programs. And so very specifically, there was one that I was in with the shuttle program management that was not long before Columbia. I don't know exactly how far away it was, maybe 6 months, maybe less. But it was a practice session done like I explained how simulations happen, where you have crew members in a simulator, you have mission control. So it was all up elaborate and a contingency scenario. And they didn't do practice sessions that included loss of the crew, because that was viewed as negative training. If you put people into a situation that they cannot escape from, you're not teaching them anything,
Okay.
So this one was a situation where the shuttle had a problem on landing and crash land, and the crew was injured. And I was in the back room. I was on console for that. We had somebody else on the console, but I was on the back room, and I was standing next to the shuttle program management. and constantly talking to them about, we need to say this. Can we say that? We're going to have to talk about the crew's injuries. How can we do this? And I had the medical person over here and the shuttle program management over there. Was a team working there, and we all worked through on that. We needed to say things, some things you can't say because of privacy concerns, because of respect for all various things. But that was just invaluable to have had that kind of close, because everybody took it serious. We were all going to be graded by these devilish sim supervisors, that we talked about at the end, and you didn't want a bad grade, so it was invaluable to the real time. I will say the other points on Ron that I gave him that first day was to let people know how he felt too, which is hard for an engineer, right? I think a lot of people are very stoic, but he did that, and
bring that empathy out, right?
well, they feel it. They don't want to show it. You don't want to share it with the world, and I get that. And I don't think, I think that's normal. That's human, and I respect that feeling. But it can be interpreted as not having any feelings. So you're feeling it. You need to let them know. And he did a very dignified job with that. He used the word which was so perfect, which I didn't give him that word. He got that devastated, that we are devastated. I just told him, and then I told him to, we talked about East Texas and how to recover and where to go for recoveries. Now, when I give him talking points, I'd had a long working relationship with him for a couple of years before that, along with a lot of other program managers before he was a program manager. But he didn't. They're all different. Every leader you work with, right, is always different. But he was of a sort where he was very good with the media and with press conferences. And he really wanted good points, right? He wanted good points and he wanted good preparation, but he called talking points, his word for them were thought provokers, which is a wonderful way to look at talking points, because I don't want anybody ever to use points I give them verbatim. They don't sound genuine that way. And they're not, and I'm not an expert. I'm not, I mean, I may be an expert on some things, but I'm not as much of an expert at the technical as they will ever be at all. So a thought provoker is the perfect way to look at it, right? And that's how he said he viewed them all. And that came across all the time in how he answered things. Now, he found them super valuable and he insisted on having them and he used them. But you could hear that you could hear it when you were the person working with him and how he interpreted it. It was just really, really good. So it worked well for the agency in that instance in terms of communications to do that. I will say, that day then I'd been up for like 12 hours. So I didn't, I mean, it's just, a couple of things about the day that are weird is that Columbia, I told you, get ready for it. It was going to come across continental US. Just by craziness, its track was going right across my hometown where I grew up, my whole the 18 years, Waxahachie. Yes, it's going right above it. And so that was rare. And I sent my mom an email the day before and called her to say, hey, get up and 8 a.m. Make sure you watch it. And she, mom is your favorite fan, right? She recorded everything I ever did on TV. I still have stacks of VHS tapes and all this stuff. But unusually, she slept in that day. She was going to get up, but she ended up sleeping in and she missed it. And I'm so glad she did, because that's actually right about where it broke apart. And then I will say the other thing is that after I got the points ready and we did prep for the press conference, they asked me if I wanted to moderate that press conference, and that would have been the full circle, right? But I'd been up for like 14 hours or something by that time at work. I'd gotten there at midnight or something, and I was pretty emotionally drained, so I deferred and asked other people to do it, and I had to get away, so I actually listened to that first press conference from a sonic drive-in in my car, because I needed some place where nobody was around me and nobody knew anything that had happened to me that day, and I could just listen to it, and then it was the ensuing days for the next week, we had a press conference a day, and it kind of followed that same scenario of preparing points. But what did was we pulled together a little group where we would have a couple of folks responsible for analyzing all the press clippings that had happened over the past 24 hours, pulling them together, summarizing them. What kind of weird questions were we getting from the press? What kind of rumors were taken off? What kind of speculation was happening? All of that, put it together in a package. We would have what we'd heard about how the investigation and the debris recovery was going. We would pull that together some, and we would all about 3 or 4 of us go in and meet with the program management at about 8 a.m. in the morning of that day. And we would give them that information. We would have a preliminary discussion about what that day might be like for the press conference. Then they would give us some things early on that we might want to do. And if there were some materials that we thought we needed to pull together for the press conference in terms of visuals or show and tell items, we would get that. Then we would go off and work on some of that. We would come back together with a more complete set of the thought provokers, the talking points, and the prep materials, and meet about an hour before the press conference. So usually, I think it was about 2:00 because they were usually in the afternoon, 3 or so, and finalize things. And sometimes there's late changes and stuff, and then we'd have the press conference, and that would work pretty well, right? And we did that for the first week, doing that.
James, just a question for you on your preparation process there. Were you able to get the that whoever the principal was for that press conference ahead of time and actually practice doing Q&A and give them some real rehearsal time, or did you not?
Well, so that's a training, right? And they had media training. Everyone had media training, right? So they didn't necessarily need the basic training. We would go over the specifics of what the media may ask and what they were going to ask, and the messaging that they needed to get across, and the new developments that were happening here and there. And so it wasn't necessarily practice Q&A back and forth. It was more discussion of letting them know the media perspective and how they're going to receive certain things. And if they gave us an answer, we might say, you want to alter that a little bit, maybe modify it because they're not going to understand it clearly that way. Know.
Yep.
And but not so much a practice training thing that needs to happen. That to me, if you have the time to do that would be a good luxury in that scenario where we were doing a press conference every day and the management is really busy managing a huge situation, a crisis situation. That's like the amount of time we got with them was amazing. Don't think we would have gotten the time to really expand it to that far,
Right. Well, that's a challenge we see in most incidents is, and even in a bunch of exercises that I've been a part of, the public affairs team will take some talking points, and as the incident commander is heading into the press conference room, hand them the talking points.
Oh, we didn't do that. No, we had a good meeting with them where we taught, and like I said, it was 2 meetings a day, really, to prepare for it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's not like these were the people doing the press conference had done tons of media previous to Columbia, right? And had also done media training previous to this. So they were not inexperienced. I don't think I would put an inexperienced media communicator in that scenario, whether they're the actual management person that maybe would tell you should go there if they are not experienced with media. That's not the good place to go gain that experience,
Not under the harsh lights of a crisis.
No.
You do not want to be learning the ropes at that point.
Yeah. And so that for about a week we did that, and I do feel, and a lot of the studies that have looked at the communications from Columbia and also compared it to Challenger, that was a key. Those first ones a key in setting the tone for how it was received. Right, the world has a lot of empathy. Had a lot of empathy for NASA. I don't know that would happen everywhere, right? But a lot of empathy for NASA. They do know that we're pushing. I love the saying at NASA is pushing the edge of the envelope. They did that on Artemis 2. That envelope, they went further than people have ever been. They went faster than people have ever gone. That's the envelope edges that they're pushing, And when you're pushing the edge of that envelope, you're going to have accidents. There'll be more accidents in the future. I hate to say it, but there will be. It's the price of progress sometimes, no matter how much and you try to not have it. People, they do understand that. I don't know that they're really forgiving, but they empathize.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Leading in a Crisis podcast. Thanks for being with us. And again, if you want to drop me an email, that's tom@leadinginacrisis.com. And we'll see you again soon for another episode. Take care.